Well, boa noite, Munson here with the Portugal show. And of course, on Tuesday evening, we are joined by our honorary grandmother, the expat elder, Mary Brown. Hello to you, Jacqueline. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Carl.
Great to see you. And how are you this evening?
I am getting better every moment.
Okay. As in a general evolutionary trend, or because of a specific incident?
Just having a tired patch and a body reacting patch, but it's on its mending.
So. Good. Yes, you said you were healing. Such a lovely word.
It is a lovely word, isn't it?
Yes, becoming whole again. Fantastic. Well, I share to some extent your feeling of tiredness. A little bit of that myself going on. Busy time of year, and so when I get a little bit tired and under resourced, I think, it's just too much to do. But then I realize if I take a break, take a rest, meditate a bit, or something along those lines, the air clears and things become easy again. So I just feel so much more able to cope with this sort of malarkey these days. I suppose one of the benefits of getting older and maybe tiny little bit wiser, possibly.
I'm sure you're getting much wiser daily.
I'll take it. Thank you very much. All right.
You know, I always find that when I'm really busy, that I've got to do the day in my head, allowing for flexibility and changes. But if I do it in my head before I start, and see it going smoothly, and I generally imagine my day before I start, and then it works really well. But if I don't do that, I seem to be always trying to catch up.
Creative visualization, a walk through, and allowing your day to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, not a self-fulfilling prophecy, a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. You keep going out. You keep cutting out, Carl.
Oh, okay. I don't know why that would be. I think I've got a pretty good signal here tonight, but who knows? It may be some sort of atmospheric thing, but let's give that up to the creator to see if we'll be supported tonight in our endeavors.
Yes. Well, he's pretty good at that.
Absolutely. And tonight we were the idea. I mean, just a bigger picture here on the Portugal show on a Tuesday night. You join me. There's generally a calmer sort of atmosphere. I think people like your presence here. People like your presence, full stop. And a thought tonight on our Happy Homesteaders / Portuguese positive news show, where we endeavor to balance things up a bit with a slightly more positive, or if not just positive, then a more balanced view of things or a bigger view of things. It just occurred to me tonight to talk about community and this idea of living or working in community. Now, of course, you kind of can't not be in community, can you? I mean, we're all in communities of a kind, and that's how that looks has changed quite a lot, I think, over the last few decades. But to put it in context a little bit, I'm thinking that the world as we experience it in groups, in families, is becoming nuclear family, single parent families, a lot of older folks living alone, sort of elder isolation. So the trend seems to be getting smaller and smaller units rather than perhaps the traditional larger units, perhaps what people in Portugal have enjoyed until fairly recently, big families. And I know there's the rough with the smooth, there's the upside and the downside of that. But I just wanted to talk about living intentionally in community and maybe thinking about what we might be missing by going into smaller and smaller units of life and living, rather than trusting and sharing and being in a bigger ecosystem of people. And I know some people are experimenting with this and trying this. I have myself in my life. I wondered what you might have to say to kick off with about the idea of living and working in community, and whether you have any experience of that or any intention in that department.
Well, I was thinking about the word community, and just because it is actually quite broad, because, well, to start with, we're part of the human community.
Yeah.
And well, at least I hope we are. I don't feel like an alien, really, sometimes. But I think what you're thinking about a specific community, but I've not. I like the idea of family, and I think it's very sad that family is getting more and more separate. But I have a feeling that that is because people are becoming more and more individualistic. And obviously, from my own personal point of view, being part of a God community is always focused towards the other and the good of the whole. And when I think the human race has lost that quite a lot, or maybe just doesn't know how to do it anymore. But then I was thinking too that we overlap in all sorts of communities for specific periods of life. I mean, we have school communities and college communities and learning communities. There's just so many that we overlap. But in the sense of having people living together and working towards something is a really nice idea, but I think it has to be with a cause that's very much bigger than ourselves, to keep us together, something worth being a community for. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And in my experience of intentional communities, because I've looked into this, and in my late 20s, I was part of forming an intentional community, which was one of the most not traumatic but weirdest experiences of my life. And I understand why now, because I was too young to really appreciate it. Although you never know you're too young to do anything until you get older. So I totally understand how that external focus you talk about, surrendering to something bigger, is really an important dynamic of successful communities. So the ones where people were quite egotistical or individualistic, trying to be together to share the community resources and be an intentional community in that sense, weren't as successful as people like the Quaker communities, the religious communities, who could surrender to an external principle rather than what I want myself out of this community. And that was a really big lesson to learn. Ours folded, I think, within a year. And the other communities that I'm aware of around the same time that had an external or spiritual or some other ethical framework outside, a conscientious framework outside of themselves, or something that they were just making up, are probably still going. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I think we definitely need that, and I find it quite easy in a Christian community, because people have the book to go by, that sort of.
Yeah.
The last word is the word of God in things, and but it's also not like a set of rules. It's more about a principle of approach in life, and that works. But there are also very good communities formed out of tragedy or lack, and maybe lack of freedom. Amanda there saying yes, aspects of village. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you for that. Amanda. We've had a few comments actually, Jacqueline. If we go into those now, as we develop our conversation, and my question to everybody listening tonight is: have you thought about living in an intentional community, a community beyond normal life, whether that be as a single person or in a family unit? Have you thought of anything more unusual than that as a way of organizing your daily or working life? Because I know more and more, certainly in the work area, co-working and shared workspaces are really popular in Lisbon, certainly, and I think they're growing all over Portugal because people understand the benefit of working together in a shared space, not necessarily on the same project, but to be in the same place, sharing the same resources and enjoying a certain atmosphere. And I know that in Portugal, there are also a number of intentional communities, and it is a place of choice for intentional communities to set up. So have you, the people we're talking to who've joined us tonight, thought about that? And what are your observations? What are your experiences? What are your fears about such a way of life? So boa noite to you, Joel, in Porto. Great to have your company. Eric J is here. Hola, boa noite, Lady J. And Carl, good evening to you, Eric J. Thanks for your feedback about the stream. I'm hoping that's going to settle down. I trust it will. Owen, a quick visit. Boa noite, everyone. Sending love to all. Right back at you, Owen. Thank you for that. Mark Rigby, boa noite to all up there in Povoa de Varginha. You've just got here, Mark. Have you thought about living in a wider, bigger community, intentional community, or are you involved in your village community? Is that your aspiration? Forgive me for prying. You don't have to answer. And going back to Amanda's point, in some aspects in our village, I could say, yes, we're standing together as a community. But then the ones that are just like so ego driven just breaks it up and eventually just drain out, makes it more difficulty for me not being part of the parish as I don't understand Portuguese. So yes, do miss that, says Amanda Marcus. Oh, interesting. So you, in terms of belonging to a community, you're talking about a geographical village, freguesia, parish community here, Amanda, and making yourself part of that. Because I mean, if nothing else, that would be really interesting to talk about tonight. People's experiences of infiltrating their local community and making themselves useful to their local community, becoming an asset, developing social capital that I sometimes talk about. So very interesting to hear about what ideas people have for making friends locally, building networks locally, if not surrendering or bringing about some bigger vision of an intentional community. And we'll take a look at Tamara in the Algarve in a little while after we've opened up this conversation. But thank you, Amanda, for your observations. So, Jacqueline, were you ever tempted to sort of jump in wholesale to a Christian community where you live with people, work with people, and share resources in that way? Has that been an option for you?
What, like a nunnery or?
Oh no, not as in a religious order, but as in, like sometimes Quaker communities get together, don't they? You have your own house, but it's in a shared compound. I suppose like Amish people, because certainly in the pandemic times, the Amish way of life has suddenly made a whole lot more sense, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But no, I haven't really thought of that because it's, I mean, it's a spiritual community more than anything. And it's designed to get out into all aspects of the world. I mean, that's what God wants us to do. He doesn't want us to live shut up together. There are advantages of that. And I suppose it's good to demonstrate perhaps a way of life that can be achieved like that. But it's because it's a spiritual community, I'm in that community across the world.
Okay.
Born again believers, and that's it, So when you are actually physically together, there's already a bond that operates. So you can be in community really anywhere with one another.
Yes.
And across all languages, nations, and barriers, because that's because the nucleus is there to be round.
Yes.
And to be over.
Like a shared understanding, and then it's a given. So when you meet, you've already got a bond of a kind. that you can work upon.
You have more than a bond of a kind. You are a family, and you are spiritually the same in a born-again community.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, we've got an interesting point coming in. I don't know what this has got to do with community, Eugene, and whether when you get here to Portugal, you're thinking of living in splendid isolation to get away from other human beings, or if you plan to work in cooperation with others. But your aside here is Jesus, as our continental cousins call him, Jesus, was Irish. Deal with it, Pharisees. Okay, interesting point of view, Eugene. Thank you so much for that. How's the pochine tonight? The one I was part of in my late 20s was a residential community, and it makes hilarious sort of comedy material now. And we had, there weren't sort of rules exactly, but there was definitely a kind of, like an assumed code of conduct, and we were sort of vegetarian, if not vegan, and we would meditate. And we had a library of spiritual books that we made available to the rest of the wider community. And it's a bit embarrassing talking about it now because it just sounds so worthy and virtue signaling and spiritually correct and everything. But I was well into that. I was really up myself in my late 20s, thinking about how the world could be so much better and what everybody needed to do for that vision to become real. So it was all these sort of spiritual cliches. And my biggest takeaway, if you like, my biggest realization about trying to live in an intentional community with other people was that as soon as you do that, as soon as you share your life with other people, it's like your family reforms, but with different faces. So all the kind of psychotherapeutic healing things, the traumatic things that need healing in all of us from our childhoods to varying degrees, suddenly start playing out. So it's not the usual people of like mum, dad, brothers and sisters. It's like you think you've set up a community in an idealized way with these characters who all are singing from the same hymn sheet to mix up our metaphors here. But I just started transferring my stuff onto those people, and then immediately there's a power struggle, and the usual group dynamics of what is it, forming, norming, storming, and performing, and often most groups don't get past the storming bit. Very few get to perform at the end of that. But this is what I didn't realize, that unless I did more work on myself, as it were, it didn't really stand much of a chance because we were dogged by these interpersonal dynamics. So we had an idealized version of what we were trying to do, and then there was the reality day to day of how we'd be hiding from each other or dominating or submitting to each other in very subtle sort of power play kind of ways. It was absolutely fascinating. And then I got away from that and went back into a much more traditional normal dysfunctional family setup where I knew where I stood.
Where you recognize the dysfunction and it's more comfortable than a new dysfunction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, yeah. But this is, as human beings, we love to play the blame game, don't we? Which is, I've now got to notice, well, it's not actually currently here, so maybe I'm not practicing it quite so well, but I've got a notice on my desk saying, I did it. I did it. I created this. And that's not a very nice thing to have to face up to, but it's also the easiest way out, because it puts control firmly back in your own hands, and it's a decision usually.
So tell me more about that. I did it as in I am responsible for my experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Because you're right.
There are genuine victims in the world. I'm not saying that they're not, that especially amongst children or, suppressed people. But normally we are responsible for what we do, and we're also responsible for how we receive what is done and what we do with that in our mind. And I don't know if you read the post I put up on the Homesteaders about an old lady going into an old people's home,
Yes.
which a lot of people dread and moan and groan and lose all their identity. But she just made up her mind she was going to love every minute of it before she even went there and saw it. So,
well, to me, that's positive news.
And it's definitely how I receive things. And this is where you get, I mean, obviously the clashes usually show where our insecurities are.
Yes.
So, which is what you touched on in speaking about the community that you lived in for a while. Those things that come at you, which you think are other people being absolutely horrible to you, or or you're spatting with, are just unhealed things within ourselves.
Yes.
And so it's, in actual fact, as soon as if you do realize that straight away.
Douglas, I'm sure that's.
I'm reading the comments. If you realize that straight away, it's just it puts you back in charge and you can do something.
Yes. May I share that story? I mean, I don't know if you have it handy and if you want to read it. I mean, I've got it on the screen in front of me. Which would you prefer?
Yeah, I didn't have it, and it wasn't. It was actually on somebody else's page. I filched it because I was so impressed with it, because it's how I would like to be.
And may I read it out?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So a few comments before I do. It's a good evening from Douglas Hughes to you, Dona Jacqueline, and to me as an afterthought, I think. And he then goes on to say, this chat is a bit deep for me on a Tuesday night. Would you prefer us to wait till Thursday or Friday, Doug? Or is it just a bit deep at any time? And I think you're right. I think it is a bit deep. And I think, owning the things that Jacqueline's talking about is a pretty big and brave step, and often, avoided by us without a doubt. Good night to Dona Jacqueline from Eugene, who then goes on to say Carl is terminally bald. Now, I would refute that. I think bald, yes, but terminally, no. It's after a savage attack because of a translation error or a language barrier problem from the hairdresser I went to. It is growing back now, Eugene. And I did see her in the street, and she didn't run and hide. So I think there's no problem between us. I will be back to that hairdresser. It's not terminal. It's just kind of slow, basically. And Chris Rattenbury from Devon in the UK says, Mrs. T says, let's have a Munson bingo night. A good way to occupy oneself. Well, Chris, if you set that up, I'm sure we can organise that, maybe over Christmas. And Douglas says, I want Eugene's touch to miss it. Whatever Eugene's having, we'll have the same. And Ree says, hi, Ree. Thank you for all your lovely communications on social media. Evening from Rhea. Simple evening and a smiley face there. So let's I want to share that lovely story. Excuse me. A lady who was over 90 years old had a great flair towards dressing up well, applying makeup, and arranging her hair in beautiful patterns. She and her husband had been married to each other for over 70 years. After the departure of her beloved partner, having no children and no one in the family to care for her, she decided to move to a nursing home. Even on the day when she vacated her home for good, she dressed up elegantly and looked gorgeous. After arriving at the nursing home, she had to wait patiently in the lobby for hours before the room was ready. When an attendant helped her make her way to the room, she gave the lady a visual description of the tiny space that she was meant to occupy. I love it, the lady expressed with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who had just been presented with a new puppy. Mrs. Jones, you haven't even seen the room yet. Just wait, the attendant remarked. Well, my joy has nothing to do with the room, the lady replied. Whether I like my room or not does not depend on how the furniture is arranged. It depends on how I arrange my mind. Happiness is something you can decide ahead of time. and I've already decided to love my room, to love the people around me, to love my life. It is a decision that I make every morning when I wake up. You know what? The greatest asset we all have is the power to choose how we feel. The lady continued speaking as the attendant listened attentively with her mouth wide open. I can imagine that scene. I can spend my entire day in bed thinking of the pain I am in, focusing on the parts of my body that no longer work, or I can get out of bed and be thankful for those parts that do work. Each day is a gift, and as long as my eyes can still open, I will continue to focus on today and all the happy memories I've stored in my mind just for this time in my life. The attendant was astounded by the positive attitude of the elderly lady, whose life from an external point of view was only full of problems and hopelessness. Actually, only problems happen automatically. Happiness is a choice we all have to make. So problems happen automatically. Happiness is a choice we all have to make. Hatred happens automatically. Love is a choice we all have to make. Being negative happens automatically. Positive attitude is a choice we all have to make. Complaining is automatic. Gratitude is a choice we all have to make. Let's choose right and live well. And that was Bhavesh Gandhi, not that Gandhi, but Bhavesh Gandhi there. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, Jacqueline. Any further thoughts on that when you hear it for a second time?
Well, I just love it, and it's how I would like to live. And I'm reminded of a story of a man and his son who were taken in to a Jewish concentration camp, which must have been some of the worst places that human beings have ever lived in, and decided that he was going to make it a happy experience for his son, and obviously succeeded really well and survived and wrote a book. And I wish I knew his name. I'd heard the story, but I haven't ever found out who it was, because I'd love to read his book, because that must be the ultimate in keeping your mind in the right focus. But I have met a lady who was in prison for life, and who actually had a God encounter that completely changed her life. But she also realized that she had to stay where she was because of her, she was she had actually murdered somebody, or more than one person. But the joy that she lived in was phenomenal, and she wrote about her life. And I just would love to be in that position, because it's almost like nothing can hurt you, and I believe we can with the with the help of God. I think we can do that.
Well, it's so interesting you should say that, because it would appear in the world at the moment we're up against the most fearful of circumstances. And there's a massive test available to anybody who would want to live fearlessly and positively at the moment, right? Arguably, perhaps some of the hardest times in the world in general, to remain positive and to remain fearless and not to be ground down by a lot of the what seem like interminable circumstances. Certainly not, anything like you've talked about just then, of life imprisonment or a concentration camp, but certainly over the long term, a pretty grim picture of being told how to behave in many ways, and having your life governed for you in many ways. That's quite a test for people to remain as positive as we're speaking of here right now.
Well, for me, that has been really easy. In the COVID circumstances, is what you were talking about, presumably.
Yeah. Yep.
And I mean, I actually feel that as a human community, we should go another step. But that has been easy for me. I've been practicing getting towards that ever since my husband died, because I would have gone under. So for me, that's been a good practice of of the position of those people that you've just read about or talked about.
Yeah.
of learning to do that. And so I had been practicing that for some time when COVID hit. Apart from anything else, I was already in isolation to a certain extent through, just physical disability. But I've learned to do more in that time than I think I've learned in my entire life. And I'm really excited about living and want to live for a long time because I've got so much more to do. And so that's, I can see it working. It's working for me. And well, so if I can do that, anybody can.
I can see it working for you as well. And I do take it for granted. I mean, we're friends and we work together in this environment. And I think I take it for granted how incredibly dynamic and positive you are, and what you obviously, the things that you must take for granted in your life, and what you achieve, and what your plans are. It's quite extraordinary. And I think that comes across, whether people hear it from what we talk about, or just, pick it up energetically, vibrationally, through your personality, whatever it is. I think people recognize that in you and have a lot of respect for you in that way.
Thank you. It's very kind. Means I'm getting somewhere. I'm making a bit of progress.
Absolutely.
Can I say something about bingo?
Of course you can.
Because it always makes me laugh, actually, because I have never played bingo in my life. I have no objection to it. But somebody once talked to me about what they called bingo flaps.
Oh, really?
Have you ever heard that expression?
Well, are they the same as bingo wings?
Well, it's when old people get older and all this bit goes soggy and flappy underneath here.
Yeah, bingo wings.
And every time I hear the word bingo, I think of these sorts of
see what
which mine are.
See what you've done, Chris.
So I don't want to look at the bingo flaps.
All right, we'll give that a miss then. Let's give that a miss.
No, I don't mind playing bingo, but I just sort of go, look.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think we are talking about bodies tonight, aren't we? Given that the focus on my baldness, which Ree says is handsome. Bald is handsome, Eugene. So there you go, Eugene. Take that. I would eat a couple of toshtas by now, or there'll be toshtas by now, says Joel in Porto. A great thing. I mean, it's really brilliant how, just as a bit of an aside here and a bit of Portuguese culture for people tuned in, how you'd look at something like a tosta mista and say, that's just a cheese and ham toasty. Or you'd look at torrada and say, that's just toast. And it is so not. The Portuguese do it differently, so that the cheese and ham toasty is a tosta mista, and it's uniquely Portuguese. And the same with torrada. When I post pictures of torrada and say this is Jenga for breakfast, it's like huge sections of toasted bread, pau de forma, I think they call it here, absolutely slathered in butter and piled up on the plate like Jenga. And people say, well, that's just toast. It is so not just toast. And you will find out when you get here. So thank you for mentioning tostas mistas tonight, Joel and Eugene. I want to arrive at a nursing home with no makeup, says Ree. Hair askew and wearing my onesie footed pajamas. That will make me happy. Lol, simple pleasures. Don't wait, Ree. I mean, why not? If that's what floats your boat, those sort of simple pleasures, why not go with that look right away? No problem here. Sorry, Jacqueline. Were you going to add something?
I just wanted to say, well, that's what turns her on and makes her happy. Why doesn't she do it now?
Go for it. Douglas says, I once met a great philosopher. When I asked him, yeah, mate, what's it all about then? He replied, damned if I know. And that probably is quite a good sign of a good philosopher, isn't it? Someone who's prepared to say they don't know. It's often there's a little bit of wisdom among people who know that they don't know, I think. And he goes on to say, with his own bit of philosophy here, life is an illusion caused by the lack of Vinho de Porto. I think I could go with that as well. I understand what you're saying, Doug, but you have to remember what Will says. If I the problem with getting into wine is I might never get out again. So, and then Susan says, "Hi, Susan, great to have you here. I think being part of a community is how you're able to interact with people. Language is not a barrier if you can communicate with happiness and kindness." And we know that, don't we? That the old bag of oranges or kiwi fruit or eggs or cabbage on the doorstep is neighborhood diplomacy, neighborhood love in action, neighborhood networking, whatever you want. It's just goodness in the community, isn't it? And yeah, you don't need to be able to speak the language to be able to perform or receive a gesture of that kind. Good point, Susan. Lol, I already have that look tonight, Carl. So Ree's well ahead of us there, Jacqueline.
Bring back hugging is what I say.
And bring back hugging too. I think we need to ask Joel in Porto whether it would be seen as okay to open up on the hugging with Portuguese people. I think younger Portuguese people definitely. It's funny, isn't it? What is and isn't allowed? Because back in the UK where we're from, kissing on both cheeks might seem quite forward, but it's quite a normal Portuguese thing, as I understand it, even among strangers. But the full-on hug might be a little bit too much for some of the older Portuguese folks. So let us know, please, Joel. I saw your comment, Eugene, coming in there. Let us know, Joel. I mean, Jacqueline wants to be hugging people again. How is hugging seen, generally speaking? A bit of a generalization in Portugal, and what's the way to break the ice and move forward with that? No one does pau like the Portuguese. That's a quotable quote, isn't it? You're absolutely right, Douglas. Of all kinds, power of all kinds, power, casual. And Eugene, Ree has snow blindness from your bonds, Carl. I'm loving the heckling tonight. Thank you. I should have put a bit of powder on, shouldn't I? Just as in the old days on the stage. Hug the same way I give kisses to the cheeks. So, okay, hugging looks like it's all good. Is that your experience, Jacqueline, hugging people in Portugal?
I don't know that I'm on hugging terms with lots of people, but I do. I always hug people if we've got a bit of in my household anyway, that if we've got a bit of a spat that we've gone through, it's sort of, we say, right, okay, it's all better now, all better, have a hug.
Yes.
It seems to do more than words. And I've always found that touch does that too. So any form of physical touch, which is something that they seem to have made us afraid of. Well, I'm not afraid of it, but
they
stand up for our hugging rights. Actually,
yes, stand up for your hugging rights. That's something.
I think we should stand up for our rights. Period. We should actually. I got really challenged by listening to something yesterday, and I just thought, if people just accept everything without challenge, then we get what we deserve. And I want to know the whys and of the measures sometimes that are being taken, or the whys of the switching round of things, and why shouldn't we ask our MPs what the basis is for them doing things.
Well, that's an interesting twist in our conversation tonight, because something that might go hand in hand with the atomization of society, as in people living in smaller and smaller units, nuclear family, single family, people living alone, has a direct relationship, I think, to community power, doesn't it? And if you allow yourself to go into smaller and smaller units, you're not very powerful or forceful, are you, as a collective? And the government around the world has clearly been very effective in just being able to say, okay, you need to do this now. I'm not just talking about in Portugal. I'm talking about in all of the countries that we know of that we would see as part of what would we call our understandable concepts of sort of Western democracies. And I know that's a broad spectrum, but it's been pretty much within a certain bandwidth, government saying you do this and people do it. And there hasn't been a big conversation or a dialogue, has there, from the civic community with the government? The government has been kind of asked, tell us what to do, and people have very openly and very acceptingly, is that the right adverb? But people have been very happy to be told what to do, even though they were grumbling like hell about it behind the scenes, or in smaller groups, person to person, or in on social media, or on phone-ins on radio shows. But the community of people, the civic community, you're absolutely right, doesn't have much of a voice, does it, in the face of the government?
Well, it doesn't, but I mean, governments, from what I understand in a democracy, are, elected by the people to represent the people, so it shouldn't be the other way around.
Yes.
So, we're giving up our rights to ask and question and do.
Yes.
Hugging, for instance.
Okay, so we've got a few people tuned in tonight. Let's do a quick straw poll and ask if people, a simple yes or no, please, to this question. And let me just put it in a banner tonight. Do you feel well represented by your government? Is that the gist of what we're talking about here?
I suppose it is, yes.
Okay, I'm happy to change that to get the right sentiment here. But I mean, a simple yes or no to the first question then. Do you feel well represented by your government? I mean, in that sense, the government of the place that you call home. And so interestingly there, from what Jacqueline's saying, if you don't feel very well represented and you're still doing what you've been told to do by the government, that does create a bit of a dissonance, doesn't it? That, what you're being asked to do is not necessarily what you want to do. It's not what you would ideally have happen. But how on earth do you make your feelings and your ideas heard anymore by the officials who ultimately tell you how to live your life? So let's just have a quick look. Already the feedback is coming in. No, big no, no, and no. So far, it's time to say enough is enough. Okay, interesting, Fiona. Both in the UK and Portugal. Amazing. And on hugging, I never thought I could feel a sense of well-being by an elbow bash with a really good friend. Goodness knows how I'll feel when I can get a proper big hug. Amazing. Yes, Susan resonating there with the human contact thing for sure. Douglas says Italy is more bigger the hugs than Portugal. Algarvians a lot more huggy-feely than, say, rural Alentejo. He's done his research. Probably comes from bitter experience, maybe. Sending you a massive virtual hug, Jacqueline, from Fiona. There you go. And since I have spares, as I've not hugged anyone in months, Carl can have a hug too. Oh, thanks, Fiona. I'm feeling that. Thank you very much indeed. So we are definitely getting a sense of community here tonight. I miss the hugging and kissing. Can't wait to get back to Europe post-COVID and hug and kiss everyone. Why, Victoria, is it not happening? Are people really averse to that where you live? Interesting. No, for the UK. Do you feel represented by your government and not long enough in Portugal to decide? Doreen, no, not with the current US administration. I don't know if it's representative of the sort of people we attract into our lives here, Jacqueline, but it's no all the way so far from everybody. Interestingly, what say you on that?
Well, I feel very sad for government people, because I think that a lot of them are feeling just like we are, like in the dark about so many things, that they haven't got the information. They're depending on different sources now, but one source to start with, then they're now we've got lots and lots and lots and lots of different views on the whole subject. And they don't know what to do any more than we do, and so they're just struggling on. I actually feel in that way, we should try to support them, but I don't think we need to just lie down and take everything, because I mean, what's to say it will ever be over?
Yeah, indeed. That's definitely occurred to me. It's like, what's the point at which people say, and we have that sentiment here. Somebody said, didn't they? Enough is enough. But what is the point at which people in numbers say that? Is it because it's gone like, okay, it's 12 months now, this is ridiculous, we can't live constantly like this? Would it be a certain amount of people unemployed, a certain amount of businesses that have gone bust? What are the criteria that with which we would measure this? And often, if we leave it to that, the damage is far too great by the time we've realized, right?
Yeah, exactly. But also, you know, they did an experiment with monkeys. I'm not saying that the human race has developed from monkeys, but they did experiment with monkeys. Oh, sorry, I lost you for a minute. That was me.
We can hear you.
Which is where they deprived them from a very young age from any contact with their parents or with anything else. They could see them but not touch them, and they just curled up and died eventually.
I heard that.
And they also became very stupid. And we're not meant to be in isolation, this is very much about community. We are meant to be in community, and we are. We express things through body language and touch and looking into each other's eyes and, being able to touch. I worked in the field of touch for years, so I know how powerful it is. And, even medically. And certainly being in isolation does make people more and more and more fearful. And, I just feel so terribly sad for the children that they're losing their interaction. I loved that picture that you put up. I think it was you that put it up on the Homesteaders of the kids all playing football in the streets. And
yes.
And I mean, footballers hug each other all the time. I mean, are footballers still allowed to hug each other if they have football matches that we can only watch from a distance, or what? I don't know.
I think it's so automatic in that situation, and it is a great metaphor for life, of course, what goes on a sports field. And so the high moments are celebrated, and it's a fascinating reflection, isn't it, of an intense version of life. 90 minutes of life, or however long a game is on a sporting, a field of sport. And when in the high moments, people are hugging each other and congratulating each other and opened out and punching the air and feeling great. In the sad moments, their heads are hanging low. They're not, they might put an arm around each other. It's all there to see, isn't it? How humans are in that environment, which, like you say, we're not allowed to watch in any great numbers anymore. But I'm sure they do hug each other. You can't stop that.
And you have a family, I mean, children, when they hurt themselves, they come to you to be comforted, physically held. And this is, I think, another one of the horrors that's happening through COVID is people are dying on their own, elderly people shut up in homes and things like that. And it's just not human. It's inhuman. And children come, and they're bawling their eyes out. They've fallen over and they've got the minutest of scratch and they're screaming their heads off. And mummy kisses it better. It's just... And I don't think we lose that as we go on. There's nothing more soothing than somebody sitting holding your hand when you're in agony or whatever. There's just something reassuring that another person is there, and we're just not meant to operate this way. And I don't understand it.
I agree, and I think many others would agree with you as well. And perhaps because we don't have a civic community, we have given this power up, haven't we, over our collective lives. And we may look back at this stage as being quite incredible that so many people were able to be so controlled and their destinies so led by people who they felt very little accountability with, and whose decision-making processes they weren't part of. And like I said before, with the best will in the world, public health is a numbers game, isn't it? It's not a personal matter. And at the other end of the spectrum that you've talked about there, we don't look at our families and friends and loved ones as numbers, do we? We are involved with each other on a personality level, and that's where humanity dwells, isn't it? As soon as you start looking at people as numbers, you have a very strange experience of life, and the compassion and the humanity goes out of it. And I think that's absolutely what we're seeing.
Well, what did you see in the concentration camps?
Absolutely. People were literally numbered, weren't they?
People were numbered.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for life.
Yes. Yes. And I didn't realize that our conversation about community would go quite this way tonight, but, we have an open policy here to discuss what comes up. What's coming up in the comments is, as well as all the no's that people don't feel represented. Victoria says, yeah, we do hug and kiss here in the States, but with COVID, it's not possible. And yeah, it's been turned into, people doubting themselves, right? And censoring themselves to go against their most human instincts, which is what we're talking about tonight. Virtual hugs to everyone. So we're doing our best tonight on the Happy Homesteaders and Portuguese Positive News Show, throwing out the virtual hugs all over the place to everyone, to whoever who wants them, and feeling those vibes of positivity and love. Scary thoughts about it being too late to recover. That's often the way with human behavior. It's weird, isn't it? Because, we set things in motion, I suppose, and it's only we see the results, and by that stage, you're only missing the water after the wells run dry, sort of thing. Victoria Benson, they're responding to that really awful monkey experiment, but they're a different kind of representation of perhaps remembering those hearing no evil, seeing no evil, and speaking no evil as a useful guide in life. Sad to say, says Eric, most people want to be led, whether they admit to it or not. That's what makes it difficult to form an opposition. And maybe we're going to get so sick of that, Eric, right now, that some opposition, or I hope that's the problem, isn't it? Is that I think what you're talking about, Jacqueline, is not opposition necessarily, but collaboration. It's not like we want to go against being governed. It's like we want to be governed in a way that works for everybody, right?
Yes, and I'm not talking about rioting or protesting or any of those things.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be able to have a place, or we should, I hate to use the word should, be able to say, well, I would rather risk COVID. Yes, exactly, that person, Fiona, there. The Christian principles are also like, that you comfort one another, you do lay hands on the sick, you do hold people's hands when they're dying, and so if I was put in isolation in an old people's home and my family couldn't come to see me, I know for me that would damage me dreadfully, and it would damage them. And, I would rather die holding somebody's hands than avoid dying, in a way, for a few more.
I understand that.
Minutes or a couple of months.
Yes.
And, maybe we should be allowed the freedom to take the risks, even if we know that it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Which I think you do in community. And I was thinking about during the wartime, the cooperation that went on. And my family lived in Ireland for a little while during the very tail end of the war, and they shared food naturally with each other, and there was a community built up through adversity. But they did, they probably broke some of the rules, but it did it with love, not just rebellion.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're big enough to make choices. You know, if you don't give people any choices, they never develop the ability to make them.
Yes. And the paternalistic society is saying, we can't give you choices because you'll do the worst thing. You can't be trusted. This seems to be the message, doesn't it?
Well, it's ignoring us altogether, really, and saying you will conform.
Yeah. I had this crazy thought earlier on. I was thinking, you know how in trains years ago there used to be smoking and non-smoking carriages, and
Yeah.
it went through my mind that you could have mask wearing and non-mask wearing carriages, so people could choose their behavior. And I know what would happen in public health terms. People would say, well, that's just selfish, you know, you can't, what about the impact on the health system? But that doesn't stack up, does it? Because, you know, people who wear masks on trains, for example, and would want everyone else to do it, can still have the right to go home and smoke and drink and be obese and still be looked after by the health service. It's kind of, it's part of the of freedom we enjoy, isn't it? To not say to people, well, you've been stupid, so I'm not going to take care of you. That we know we can be stupid as human beings, don't we? And we still love each other and take care of each other, unless, of course, it comes to some of these bizarre COVID tactics, and then it's like, you know, it's there's no talk about this. You can't be stupid here. You've just got to do what you're told.
Well, I don't like that. I think we should respect each other more than that. To think that we actually could work it out amongst ourselves if we also really know the facts. But the problem is that it's almost impossible these days to get the truth about anything, because there are agendas behind absolutely everything that goes on, and the media seems to play along with it. And you know, you can go to all sorts of I can't think of the word for media that's not sort of in the mainstream. But,
independent, impartial.
Independent. And you will hear varying views, but also quite similar views, but you hear the same things being dished out like a sort of boring soup, really.
To me, it's an ideology. You know, I mean, faith leaders must look at this and think, wow, if only we had the same power, that we could get everybody behaving in the same way without question. It's a kind of cult in its own funny sort of way. As we conclude this hour on that rather controversial note, a few more comments to factor in here. Fiona, I'm loving the cut of your jib tonight. Yes, we should be able to take our own risks and live lives to the full. Government shouldn't be in charge of individual lives, and I think it's only because we've allowed them to take that liberty, as in take our liberty, that they feel okay about doing it. I suspect. Isolation, you also say, Fiona, kills faster than COVID. Sorry for that downer statement, but it's true according to you, Fiona, and I can see how that makes sense. Yes, not in COVID time. No hugs or kisses. And again, you know, a bit like the idea of not knowing until it's too late. We won't know what the effect of that is, will we, until it comes out in our own experience? You know, like this year of no hugging or kissing and being afraid of strangers. We don't know what the effect will be on our society and each other with this, which is an experiment, basically, isn't it? Douglas says, what I'm concerned about is the idea of letting everyone come together for Christmas. The virus is bound to spread. Absolutely, Douglas. But the scale and context is all skewed, isn't it? Because you know, one of the funny things about people changing their behavior, I think, is seeing the effect of not changing their behavior collectively. So we know what it's like, don't we, when people drink too much? We know what it's like when people smoke too much or eat too much or eat the wrong things. We see that, don't we? And we kind of educate each other in a slow sort of way when we see what goes on with people's lifestyle choices. And I did see a meme, and I know, you know, memes are as good as they are bad or bad as they are good, but it is really a strange kind of pandemic when Most people don't know anybody who's been seriously affected. I mean, we know of people who know people, and it's reported in terms of numbers and so on. But it's a weird plague or pandemic when it's so little in your experience apart from what's reported to you. You know, in so many people have no direct experience to inform their behavior in the way that they know what it's like to have chickenpox, measles, be hungover, and all these other lifestyle things and diseases where we've definitely had a personal taste of it. Cancer, for example, heart disease. We know people who've had those things, who do have those things, and we can make a call, can't we, and change our lifestyle. But with COVID, it's been so proactive and so preemptive and so based on ideas and faith that we're not doing that with COVID. We are. It's an act of faith, I think, and faith of the wrong sort, possibly, Jacqueline.
Well, I mean, I've never understood why the excuse has been, I mean, if we've got a virus that's very active and very dangerous, and it's not going to go away, you know, so we're going to have to face the results of it. I mean, probably Will would know more about the sort of long-term behaviour of viruses and things that I don't know, but it's putting off an event in order that health systems don't get overloaded. But
Yes.
I haven't actually seen any health systems that are loaded to the gun. I've seen pictures, but some of the pictures that I've seen are not recent pictures. So I just don't understand, whenever have we isolated healthy people? I mean,
Yes.
isolating sick people is one thing. I think isolating healthy people for the sake of somebody that might get sick just doesn't. I can't get my head around it.
You can't compute that. And Ree is responding here. I've had 2 friends die from COVID, so playing it a little safer here. And I completely respect and hear you, Ree. And that is in your own experience, and you're making a change of lifestyle to suit your experience. Absolutely spot on. And if you were able to visit me, or I were able to visit you, and you tell me that, I don't hug or kiss you. I talk to you through your window if you're concerned, and we work it out, don't we? We work out what seems to be the right thing to do. But this the thing, let's say for the sake of argument that health systems are being overloaded, and that's why we had to flatten the curve. It always struck me that given that there's going to be billions of dollars, pounds, euros of damage, you know, what's it called, collateral damage to economies because of this, it would have been a better investment to build better. Sorry, I'm sounding like a politician now saying build back better, but invest in the risk. How many, you know, it's going to be millions, isn't it, to invest in ICUs and good hospital facilities and training staff rather than billions that is going to cost because of the economy. The investment could have been put into medical equipment and medical staff far better than shutting everything down and killing economies, in my view. Doreen Reyes is sharing a video clip. This short video clip speaks to exactly what is being said about the need for touch and human connection, especially what the elderly woman says at the end. Watch it when able. So thank you for that link there, Doreen. We'll look forward to seeing that. Jun Jiang likes my earphones. Well, that's very kind of you to say so, Jun. Hello, guys. Will's here. I'm sure he'll have something to say about what we're saying. Yes, and yeah, you know, I'm sorry to hear that, Ree, and I totally respect your decisions. And if we were in each other's lives again, I would act on that. Will saying, thanks, Jacqueline. We could make it go away if we use the right tools and go together. The solutions are clear and simple to me. Apparently not to everyone. No wonder people can't get their head around it. Jacqueline, we have people dying in London, just suffocating, old and young, and of every creed and colour, just suffocating to death in London. We have a vaccine. Let's just be safe until it arrives. Not sure quite what you mean there, Peter, as in what people are suffocating because of COVID or because of social conditions. Not sure, Peter, there. How do you all feel about the idea that shutting down ski holidays and now you're aware of the utter mess we're in. If you could go back, what would you think? Well, there's an interesting thing, the hindsight, the 2020 vision, funnily enough. What would we do if we could do it again? I'm with you, Will. I think we've overlooked health protocols that would be really helpful, cost effective, and so on. And I agree with you, Jacqueline, that we shouldn't have quarantined healthy people, and we should have shielded the sick. Jacqueline.
Well, I'm also, I have only partial use of one lung, and the other it doesn't work. And so I know what it feels like to feel as if you're suffocating, because I've had pneumonia several times. But at the same time, and I would be, when it first started, I think I was quite afraid of perhaps getting...
a bit of a cliffhanger. I don't know if you can hear Jacqueline there, but Jacqueline seems to have cut out at that point. For me anyway, I don't know if that's the same. Oh, there you go.
So I was very scared, because it's a horrible feeling. And I have every sympathy. And I have actually had family member, albeit not close relative, but a relative, who had COVID written on the death certificate and did die quite an unpleasant death. But he already had underlying symptoms and things. But I wouldn't want to be having lived through the months of it I have now, and being the way that I have been. I wouldn't change it, because I wouldn't. I think I would, in a way, rather die than be in isolation forever. And I can't see how we can come out of it. Maybe Will can tell us that it could be over.
Okay. Well, I think
we seem to, because I don't want to be depressing either. This is
sure.
And for me, the whole experience of COVID has been fantastic, because of the communities that have developed online, of the learning abilities that have developed, of the business opportunities that have opened up online, all of those different things. I would have never known if I hadn't had this period. So for me, I can look back on it, and well, hopefully I will look back on it, and then and say it's been an amazingly good time for me. So, I think that's really going back to what we were talking about. It's what you do with what you've got.
Indeed. Peter, to add, they're dying because of COVID, and we have a new virulent strain. It is not just the sick or the vulnerable, says Peter. That's pretty chilling. And Douglas, problem with COVID is we don't know who's spreading and who is not. Sick versus well doesn't apply. And Ree says, I think everyone should just do what they feel is right for them and those around them. Yeah, and to come back in and to conclude with this, for me, what is the spirit of community is to work together and communicate with each other. There is a real problem, I think, with a centralized government where we saw earlier on nobody feels represented by their government. At a more local level, I think that representation could be possible. I think Portugal is well set up for that. And if local communities could be heard and collectively could make their own sorts of decisions, which might be happening in the tiered situation, that's still an imposition. But if it's going down to smaller and smaller groups in London, for example, or smaller and smaller communities, then maybe there will be more of a voice from those communities saying, this is what we want to do collectively. This is our lives. This is our locality. These are our people. We would like some say in how this is going to work, because we've talked to each other. But I'm sad to say that the way the world's set up at the moment is that we're not geared up for people talking to each other as wide communities. We're geared up for people in very disparate and thin levels of communication, not verticals, but like in sort of niche horizontal communication. Like tonight, this is a niche horizon. We don't live in each other's lives on a practical basis where we could all march down to the Freguesia tomorrow and say, look, we've been thinking this is how we'd like to live our lives here. It's not going to work in the way that we are all spread around the world talking about this tonight. And I think that's why, in the absence of community, on a local level that's really powerful, of course governments will just tell everybody what to do. So let's finish there. We do have some notices, don't we? We'll continue this. I don't want to shut anybody down or shut anyone up, but don't worry about new strains. Take no notice. Take no notice, says Will. Interesting chat tonight. Bonoit for now, says Douglas. Hope it wasn't too heavy or deep. Fiona Worrell, yes, trusting each other to take precautions for the right things and release people to earn their livings and see their families as they see fit. I'm with you there, Fiona. A natural recovery and immunity. Panic, it's not working. Vaccine, it's brilliant, but need to keep updating forevermore. Get bent, says Will. We can't have gatherings here in Florida except for funerals. So Christmas Day, I'm having a funeral for my turkey, and you all are invited. Thanks, Ree. Really appreciate a bit of humor at the end. We'll come back to you for a last word, Jacqueline. But I just want to let everybody know for the diary, and because of the way things have gone for us as a community here, and the relationship Jacqueline and I have on the Portugal show here, Happy Homesteaders Hour, next Tuesday will be our last of this kind, because I'm going to have a Christmas shutdown and relaunch and tweak a few things for the new year with all the live streaming and the shows. But Jacqueline and I will do a final show as Happy Homesteaders and Portuguese Positive News on the 22nd next week, a week from today, from 10 o'clock. And then in the new year, we will go into an independent broadcast because, as you can tell, the things we tend to talk about and the places we go to in our conversation aren't necessarily representative of expats Portugal and aren't necessarily to do with life in Portugal. So and so we've this where we've got to with that is we're going to start something separate. Jacqueline, of course, I hope will remain an expat elder, grandmother to our community here, and will pop up all over the place. But in terms of the format of this show, we'll move it to an independent footing, because then we can go full on talking about God, about faith, about things that we're a little bit possibly guarded about in this context, which doesn't make any sense because, we're here in this space to talk about Portugal and being an expat and the culture of Portugal. And some of the things we really want to talk about are better suited to a new context. And that context will find its birth in January, the 8th of January, a Friday. And I think the time we went for was 8 o'clock on the 8th. So the 8 o'clock on the 8th of January will be our first show together, which will be separate from Expats Portugal. But as I say, I hope you will continue to be among us, Jacqueline, in this.
Yes. I mean, I'm loving this community, and I feel very close to the people now. And this has been a completely new experience for me, and I don't want to lose contact with the viewers here. I do call them viewers, or viewers,
community members.
Community members. Okay, I just love it, and I would love to keep on talking about Portugal and people who are coming here and helping people in whatever way that I can that are coming here. So it's really lovely. I love it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for that. So, final word to you then. We've had an interesting conversation tonight. How would you like to conclude this in terms of community, in terms of where we're at with the pandemic? What's on your mind right now?
Well, I think perhaps we could all think about how we can communicate with government and maybe work out some sort of cooperative thing, because the problem that's happening mainly both here and in America and probably other places too, but those are the only ones I've heard of, is that people, when they get really angry, just start rebelling and doing really stupid things and causing even more harm to themselves and other people. So I think we need to collectively think about how we can approach government to maybe support some of the things that we would like to do that are outside the restrictions that are currently being imposed. And I'm sure that, we could find a safe way of doing that that's acceptable all round, where people start taking responsibility for their own and each other. So back to community again. You could do that in villages or in families or you know, but it's better than just rebelling totally and going the opposite and probably causing a lot of harm one way or another.
Well said. That, you know, what a tempered and insightful and wise response, because it's not about opposition, is it? It's about collaboration and making a bigger, richer picture, rather than fighting against something. Which we know how that ends, don't we? We've had enough experience of that. To go, you know, the French Revolution. We know what happened there. It doesn't. It doesn't. You only got to look at France now. It doesn't. It doesn't work out. So on that note of collaboration, of compassion, of community. Thanks, Jacqueline, and we'll be back here next Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Thank
And
you.
thank you, everybody, for your lovely comments. And we've managed to have a conversation again without being confrontational, you know, hearing each other, taking it on board. So this is a little model, I think, Jacqueline, of what you're talking about, perhaps. Fight where it isn't. As well. And great advice. We'll leave that there on the screen. Great advice, Jacqueline. Sorry, over to you.
I was only going to say it's where we started. We're part of the human community. And that, you know, we don't ever need to lose sight of that.
Fabulous. All right. Good night. Bon night.
Good night.